Megyn, that was not an easy interview to land. How did it happen?
I was sitting here at my house on my couch, not planning on interviewing anybody, but I just called her just to see how she was doing. I didn't know whether this is a person who's telling the truth or not, and I still don't know. But I just thought as a human, man, she's taken it like a lot, and just thought I'd reach out to her. So we got to chatting, and she asked me if I would interview her, and I said yes.
So broad strokes, what are your overall impressions?
Tara Reade's had a difficult life. While it's going to be up to the voters and the viewers to decide whether she had this incident with Joe Biden, the domestic violence she suffered in her marriage has been well documented. Her husband lost full parental rights, and she had to raise her daughter by herself. She put herself through law school, although she's not a practicing attorney, and she just hasn't had it easy. So I feel for her as a human, but in these situations, as you know, you never know who to feel most sorry for, right? It's like if she's a sexual assault victim of Joe Biden's, you have nothing but empathy for her. If he's the one being unfairly accused, you got nothing but empathy for him, right? It is a he said, she said situation.
And that, I think, is the core of this story. Is anyone going to get beyond knowing? Are we ever going to sort of sort out evidence in this particular case and really look at it from a legal perspective?
My only feeling on that is she can't prove it happened. She's got corroborating witnesses who can prove she told them it happened at the time it allegedly happened, right? She's got a very strong corroborating witness who we call Karen in the interview. Karen is a working professional. She does not wish to be on the record by name, but she has spoken to my producer in this interview, Rich McHugh, an investigative reporter and producer, and she has said to him specifically that your story has never varied, that you told her this story at the time it happened. Why do you think Karen is afraid to come forward with her real name and say this publicly?
Because she's, she owns a business, and she has, a family. You see what's happening to me. My friends and family are being harassed and attacked and discredited and dragged through the mud.
What does that prove? It proves that Tara told Karen it happened. It doesn't prove it happened. So it's going to be very hard for Tara to ever prove definitively. Now, could Joe Biden prove somehow that this is a lie? If it's a lie, maybe. I don't know. Who knows? Did they have security cameras in all the halls of the Russell building back then? And he could somehow pull up and look at them. Did Tara, if she's lying, ever admit she was lying on the phone with somebody and he has a recording of it? That kind of thing could disprove it, but it's unlikely to happen. You give an interview to your local paper.
Right.
And you don't tell the full story. You only tell about the alleged harassment, and you don't mention the alleged assault. Why not?
The first question that was asked of me was, well, it wasn't sexual, was it? And that's all it took. I was so fucking encouraged, and it'd be the first time I've been telling the story. It kind of took my breath, and I thought, okay, I can't really talk about what happened. And then as soon as the local article came out talking about the harassment, within hours, before it even hit the paper, I was being called a Russian agent.
And for anybody who's sort of coming into the interview with you and me and has seen snippets or pieces of the interview with Tara that you did, broad strokes, the story is that about a year ago, Tara came forward to some reporters with a story of harassment where she alleges Joe Biden touched her hair, her neck, and her shoulders in a way that made her feel uncomfortable. She complained about it and felt retaliated for that. And in some aspects, the criticism of Tara has been that perhaps when she didn't get enough media traction for it, almost a year later, she upped the ante with a much more serious and many would say criminal allegation of this sexual encounter and assault with a penetration in a hallway on the Capitol grounds. Have I got that correct in terms of the layout?
Yes.
So for that reason, and as a lawyer, I know you look at things so meticulously down to the timing. What do you make of this evolution of her story and also the timing of drabbing it out?
I would say the evolution, that's not what bothers me about this case. Because, if she had just told in April of 19, when she first came out, harassment, and then came out later as she did with, and also assault. I can understand that. Women, they take time to tell the full story. We saw that in the Weinstein case with a lot of his victims. So to me, that's understandable. It doesn't bother me as much. And her explanation is the reporter who she first told the harassment story to was, she felt he was kind of aggressive. And the first question was, well, it wasn't sexual, was it? And she was like, no, it wasn't. So that's her story. I don't find that implausible. I don't know whether it's true. I've seen it happen before. I think Tara Reade's biggest problem is believing that a sitting U.S. senator committed a sexual assault in the middle of a hallway, in the middle of the Senate office building, in the middle of the week, in the middle of the day, in a hallway where, even according to Tara's story, he was just talking to someone moments before he allegedly committed the assault. I think that's really tough to get past because it's so incredibly reckless, right? It's just so incredibly reckless. And we haven't seen him have a reckless life. It's not that he's never touched anybody inappropriately. We know he admits, he's too handsy and he was getting past that, but not in this way. So I don't know. That to me is like the place most people get stuck.
He went on TV last Friday.
Yeah.
And said, first of all, it never happened. Period, end of report. This did not happen. He did say that in his view, accusers should start off with the presumption that they're telling the truth. Do you think he's afforded you that presumption?
No. It's been stunning, actually, how some of his surrogates with the blue checks, that are his surrogates, have been saying really horrible things about me and to me on social media. He hasn't himself, but there's a measure of hypocrisy with the campaign saying it's safe. It's not been safe. All my social media has been hacked. All my personal information has been dragged through.
Well, and you also put it to her that with that kind of behavior, it's Weinsteinian, Weinsteinian, if that's a description, there would be others. And yet her response to that?
She had a good response to that, which was, she said, I'm the poster child for why other women wouldn't come forward. And that is a real dynamic, right? We've learned that. When it's so much harder for political accusers than it is for non-political, not that the Weinstein victims had it easy, I don't mean that, but in general,
powerful.
You come out and accuse a politician in an election year, you're going to get it so hard, so bad. Like Blasey Ford against Kavanaugh, the Roy Moore accusers against him, Tara against Biden, the Trump accusers against Trump. Reporters naturally have to ask, is this a political hit job? Why now, right? That's a normal question. Doesn't make it not true. It makes it more fraught. And that's her point. Nobody else wants to put themselves.
Sure.
And Ashleigh Banfield joins us now to talk about her interview with Megyn Kelly. We've still got more coming up, so don't go anywhere, folks. Is this story, Ashleigh, more about the alleged sexual assault, or is it more about the reaction to being accused and the inherent hypocrisy that we see?
I think that's a really big part of it. If you're looking at the political prong of it, that's very different than the legal prong of it. And what I was very interested to talk to Megyn about is the legal, because she's a lawyer. And so we really stuck mostly to that. Of course, the political plays into it. You can't avoid that, right? It's an election season. So that's also a question that we discussed. But you know something, Vinny, we also discussed something in 2017 that Tara Reade had done. She had praised Joe Biden about his work towards ending sexual harassment and sexual abuse. So that's a big issue, right? And that's something that Megyn and I both personally discussed in our history in the broadcast world, because it's no secret that women have praised their alleged accusers and sometimes accusers in the workforce, but there's a reason, and it's a little different when it comes to Tara. So that's coming up. And also, I wanted to know from Megyn what she thought the impact of this would be, because sometimes the impact has, cataclysmic reverberations, right? Weinstein's in jail, Cosby's in jail, and sometimes they don't. And so I asked her about that as well, which is also coming up.
So did you have a takeaway from Megyn? Because, she's sitting there, right across from her, speaking with her. And did she ultimately come to a read of, hey, am I reading her? Does she get the feeling that, yeah, she's telling me the truth, or I still have more questions that are unanswered?
So if she did, she's the consummate journalist, and she didn't let on. And I got to be honest, I thought the interview top to bottom, which I meticulously scrutinized. I didn't watch it passively. I meticulously scrutinized. I actually transcribed it. It was really good. I mean, if you have a partisan feeling about Megyn's former broadcaster, Fox News, or if you have a partisan feeling about Tara Reade and what she might be up to, it doesn't come through in the interview with Megyn. She takes the interview like a prosecutor would, and she's also sensitive to the Me Too movement, because this is really tough territory to tread. She said it right off the top of that first part, right, Vinny? She said, look, if she is a victim, this is hard. And if Joe Biden is a victim, this is hard. So you walk that and see what that's like, and she did a really good job of it.
Yeah, it's not easy. All right, Ashleigh Banfield, we got part 2 coming up, folks. You'll see the rest of Ashleigh's interview with Tara Reade, the woman who's accusing Joe Biden of sexual assault. We'll be right back. All right, we're going to jump right back into part 2 of Ashleigh Banfield's interview with Megyn Kelly. Megyn Kelly had to sit down with Tara Reade. She's the woman accusing Joe Biden of sexual assault. Take a listen.
I think another very salient point you brought up with her was the fact that in 2017, she praised Joe Biden effusively. I think you mentioned it in the interview, saying it was his praise for his work in fighting sexual assault and sexual harassment, which I get it. You said it. Many times women will praise those who accuse them. It's a dynamic not everybody understands. You in particular have been vocal about it with Roger Ailes in the Fox days. I, by the way, was in that office as well and asked to do a twirl. And I never said a word either, because those people hold power and influence over us and our careers. However, in Tara's case, that was no longer the issue with Joe Biden. She could have said anything in 2017 and he would not have had that influence over her career. Did that sort of tweak you in any way?
Well, that's why I asked her the question, right? And the way I phrased it was for a reason. I don't want to be, you conduct an interview like this, Ashleigh, and you don't want to be insensitive to the fact that this very well may be a sexual violence survivor. And she certainly is a domestic violence survivor. But it's also, you have to worry about the survivor sitting at home, wondering whether they should come out about whoever their person is. So you can't go in there and just batter, the person over the head and be entirely aggressive. It would be inappropriate. But that's why I phrased the question saying it is true that sometimes women praise the men who sexually abuse or assault them. But why would you praise them on the issue of sexual assault, which is what she did? And her point was that was an account that was viewed by domestic violence survivors, and she was trying to sort of get the word out that he had done this good thing on this important legislation. That's up to people to decide whether they believe or not.
Do you think then that there is an evolving standard for hearing an allegation of sexual harassment or abuse versus believing an allegation of sexual harassment or abuse?
Well, I would hope there's an evolving standard on believing. I mean, people may think I'm one of those believe all women people because I've been an accuser, but I'm not. I'm a lawyer at heart. I practiced law for 10 years, and I believe in due process. Not every woman who comes forward is telling the truth. We saw that in the Duke lacrosse case. We've seen it in other cases. We don't deserve a presumption of truth-telling just because we have ovaries. And it was absurd for anyone to ever suggest otherwise. I don't want to be believed because I'm a woman. I want to be believed because you believe the evidence I've presented to you. And if you don't, no problem. I always thought it was absurd. It's absurd to the men. And I, as not only a woman and the mother of a daughter, I don't want the pendulum to swing back to where it used to be, to where we were just laughed at, and it was like, grow up, you got to learn how to play with the boys. But I also have 2 boys. I have 2 sons. and a great husband. And I don't want to see them accused and lose an entire career worth of effort off of a single allegation that's unproven. So, I see both sides of it.
The big question is always motive, right? Like, we always want to know what's motive, even though you don't have to prove motive. You always
I asked her that. She has a story about it. And I mean, look, I can understand. Like, when you have a story like this, there are many reasons why you might not want to tell the whole thing. For me, in my case, I didn't want people looking at me for the rest of my life thinking I was a sexual harassment survivor. I don't like that term for me personally. I just didn't want it. I didn't want it hung around my neck like an albatross. I don't know Tara Reade, and I don't know what her true motivations are for any of this, but I do think we have to be careful as journalists in how we talk about it. That's part of our evolution since the Me Too movement, Like, I used to say when people would say, because I went, years without saying anything to anybody else, and they'd say, why didn't you come forward? And I used to say, you need to first ask me whether there was a safe avenue for reporting. And only if the answer to that question is yes, do you get to ask me why I didn't come forward, right? Like, this country hasn't been particularly safe for women making allegations like this for a very long time. You can make the case it is still not safe.
I am 100% with you on that. And I'm going to digress from being the reporter asking you questions now to the sister in now 30 years of being in journalism. There are many instances that I lived through and never said a word to anyone, partly because I think we were all conditioned to believe that's just the way it is. And exactly for what you just said, there was no safe place to be able to say that. It was career suicide if you ever brought it up and did something courageous. It was courageous, but it was also self-sabotaging.
Can I tell you, right after I got harassed by Ailes, like, I wound up ignoring him and it did go away. And by the way, I did report it. I did report it to a supervisor who told me, ignore him, it'll go away. And it did. But right after, I went to a round table of journalists. We were all talking about the news in our newsrooms, and the subject of sexual harassment came up. And I was like, holy, I don't. And the PR person for Fox listens to the whole thing, right? And I'm like, I don't know what to do. There's no way I'm saying anything about what just happened, but I couldn't keep my mouth shut. But instead, I complimented him and said I was glad to work in a newsroom like mine. Right? Like, you just never know. Like, women for a long time have had to play the man's game. News has been a man's world, politics too. So I give her the benefit of the doubt on things like that, but that doesn't mean I believe her. And
I complimented Roger Ailes too after he asked me to do a twirl and said all sorts of things. Like, I think at one point he said, you sure look hot. And you can't do anything but you play the game because they write the checks. And
totally.
That's
and
true.
Actually, you and I know it's still that way. It is still that way. I know, like, the Me Too movement, we all want to pretend that we have this I am woman, hear me roar moment. We have so much damn work to do. It's not even funny, in news in particular.
It is getting better. I have to admit, it is getting better. But you're right. It still exists. It, without question, still exists. There's a power structure, and people behave within the power structure no matter what.
Yeah.
One last question for you. Do you think that Tara's story will have an impact in the same way that other accusers' stories have had impacts? There's been Weinstein. He's in jail. Cosby. He's in jail. I don't have to list them all off. But do you think Tara's going to...
And a big thanks to Megyn Kelly for joining Ashleigh, and really interesting, fascinating stuff. I mean, when you talk about interviewing someone who's accusing man running for president, and it's years later, and their own personal experience, good insight.